will have a giveaway featuring all 4 of the available books, along with 2 beautiful Vine Leaves Press notebooks of your choice, and a 40% discount on book orders of 10 or more. We currently have a volunteer keeping track of who is attending tonight. She is going to put names in a bowl and we'll choose a winner. If you win, we'll ask you to send us your contact information so we can get you your prize. Now, I'd like to introduce you to author Martha Engber, who helped organize tonight's program, and I invite the other authors to turn off their audio video for a moment.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to Andrea Caswell for helping moderate this event. We couldn't have asked for a more distinguished host. Andrea has a master's degree from Harvard University and a MFA from the Bennington Writing Seminars. She's a fiction editor for Cleaver magazine, where she teaches in the Cleaver workshops. In 2019, her fiction was accepted to the Sewanee Writers Conference, which, if you don't know, is a big deal. A native of Los Angeles, she now lives in Newburyport, Massachusetts. All right, take us away, Andrea.
Thank you, Martha. Without further ado, I'll begin our program. Our first author is Carolyn R Russell, author of In the Fullness of Time. Carolyn is also the author of the films of Joel and Ethan Coen, published by McFarland and Company in 2001. Her humorous YA mystery, Same as It Never Was released in 2018 by Big Table. Carolyn's new YA dystopian thriller, In the Fullness of Time, was published by Vine Leaves Press in March of 2020. Other works include essays and stories for the Boston Globe, Dime Show Review, Bridge 8, Wanderlust Journal, Medusa's Laugh, Flash Fiction Magazine, and forthcoming from Club Plum Literary Journal. She holds an MA in Film Studies from Chapman University and has taught on the college, high school, and middle school level. Carolyn lives north of Boston with her husband and 2 children. She'll now read from her book, In the Fullness of Time, set in a world where people joyfully arrange their own deaths. Its female protagonist battles the consequences of a biotechnology gone horribly wrong and the cruel theocracy that enforces a sinister solution. We welcome Carolyn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Andrea. My dystopian thriller, In the Fullness of Time, came out in March, just as we were all coming to grips with the reality of the pandemic. It was interesting timing. I'm going to read from the beginning of the book so as not to give away any mysteries. I call my mother. We've been having a tough time together lately, but I know I can always count on her in a crisis, especially when she finds out that this one involves a child in need. When my mother arrives, I'm surprised. She's pulled her clerical hood as closely as she can around her face and used its transparent veil to cover her mouth and nose. She's getting soft, I can't help but think. Or maybe the stench of the city is getting worse and I haven't noticed. In any case, Meredith Whitman has broken her own record for foot speed. From the stricken look on her face, I can guess why. I missed curfew twice last week. Plus, there's been some other stuff. I'm not sure how much she knows or what she's been able to guess. She probably assumes I'm in trouble again. Well, hello, young ladies, my mother says. She reaches beneath her tunic to a hand-sewn compartment in the lining. I have a miniature e-taser in mine. It's small, but produces a current strong enough to incapacitate 3 large men. My mother retrieves a NutriBrix bar from hers and hands it to Monica, who tears open the wrapping and shoves the bar into her mouth in one quick motion. I wonder how long it's been since her last meal, and I feel terrible that I didn't feed her immediately. What was I thinking? I meet my mother's eyes, and no words are needed. Another victim of the state's austerity measures. Slow starvation for those unlucky enough to be low-born. But I watch as she takes in the child's braids and clothing and grasps the paradox. This child comes from circumstances that should have put her well beyond most of the cruel realities of life in the States. And yet, she's clearly very hungry and looks like she's been out among the sun-bleached multitudes without a bath for a very long time. My mother arches an eyebrow at me, and I shake my head. I know as much as she does. She gives me a quick kiss on the cheek and takes me aside. No idea who she is or where she's from? Not yet, but I'll find out. You know, I'm pretty good with a Hydra computer. My mother smiles. Yep, I know, she says. Recently, there had somehow been a little issue with extra water allocations directed to the city's poorest citizens. In a moment of weakness, I amazed my family by being able to explain exactly how the mistake might have been accomplished from a compromised Hydra computer portal. Can you take her home, Mom? I asked. Her name is Monica. She's not saying much right now, but maybe later. Can we just take care of her for a bit until we find her people? Of course, honey, she says, walking toward the girl. I was about to suggest that. What do you say, Monica? Will you come home with me to Somerset's house? Somerset calls me monkey, says the child, because I can hold on tight. Monkey it is, says my mother. I hug Monica, now officially monkey, and wave. I'll be home a little late tonight, I say. Don't you and Dad wait up. I'll make the curfew siren. I leave quickly before my mother can muster a response that might ruin our fragile truce. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn. Our next author is Gina Troisi. Her forthcoming memoir, The Angle of Flickering Light, will be published by Vine Leaves Press in April 2021. The book was a finalist in the 2018 Autumn House Press full-length contest, a semi-finalist for the Zone 3 Press Creative Nonfiction Book Award, and was awarded second place in memoir for Southwest Writers Competition in 2012. Gina received an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the University of Stone Coast's MFA program in 2009. Her work has appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including Fourth Genre, The Gettysburg Review, Fugue, Under the Sun, Flyway, and elsewhere. Her stories and essays have been recognized as finalists in several contests, including the 2020 Iron Horse Literary Review Trifecta Award in Fiction and the 2018 New Letters Publication Award in Fiction. The Angle of Flickering Light is about parental deception and infidelity. It explores what it means for a girl to run wildly and recklessly into womanhood, clinging to any version of love, making temporary homes for herself again and again before finally discovering what it means to become rooted. Gina.
Hello, thank you all for coming. And as Andrea said, thank you so much, Andrea, for the introduction. As Andrea said, my memoir is forthcoming in April. It's called The Angle of Flickering Light. And I'm going to read from the beginning. The first chapter is called Left Behind. At 5 years old, I sat Indian style on the foot of my father's bed, alone in his new condo. I'd gathered his ballpoint pens from the desk in the corner and began assessing the pictures of women adorning the pens. They wore spiked high heels and bright-colored leotards and bikinis and blue sequined triangular tops that reminded me of my older sister's dance recital costumes. Their miniature figures pronounced behind sparkles and strings, their bodies splayed into decorative shapes. I tipped them upside down and their sparse garments fell off. They were proportioned women with hardened pink nipples and clumps of dark hair between their legs. I clothed and unclothed them with the flick of my wrist, turned them upside down, them right side up again. They were grown up like my mother, whom my father had just left. I was mesmerized by these ladies, by their full, buoyant breasts, by the inner curves of thighs that made a hollowed out space for their private parts to breathe. I lay down, watching their clothes fall piece by piece, nestling myself into the cushion of the king-size bed. The ladies made me think not only of my mother, but also of the faceless women my father rambled on about while out to eat at our favorite Italian restaurant. My sisters and I sat silent, letting him reiterate that Brenda, his secretary, who'd quickly become his girlfriend, had nothing to do with my parents' impending divorce, that he'd been cheating on my mother for years with all kinds of women, including prostitutes. Your mother just didn't want to admit it. She kept her head in the sand. Remember her friend Marla? Marla had lived with us for a while when she needed a place to stay in between moves. I slept with her too. We had an affair for 2 years while your mother and I were together. Ask her. When we arrived home from dinner crying, we gathered in my oldest sister's room. My mother came in to find us sitting on the bed. What happened? She asked. Krista was 12, so she did most of the talking. He said he's been cheating on you for years, that you knew, that every time he went on a business trip, it was never for business. While my mother listened, I kneeled behind Krista and began to pop the cysts on her back. I worked around the straps of her tank top, performing a job I always volunteered for since she couldn't reach. My sisters talked fast, repeated my father's words, the gestures he'd made, how he acted as if we must have known about his mistresses all along. I concentrated on squeezing, on trying to find the pointed heads on the bumps of her skin. Harder, she usually said, until all the pus comes out, until they start bleeding. But today, she didn't tell me what to do, just waited for my mother's response. I can't believe he told you those things, my mother said. She looked at the orange walls, the baskets of necklaces made of white seashells and gold nuggets, stacks of teen magazine and Prince's first albums on cassette tapes. She stood there with a blank look in her eyes, the face of someone who no longer recognized her house or her daughter's bedroom. I waited for the yellowish cream, held a tissue to catch a glob when it emerged, then the speck of blood. I chimed in. He said he's been having affairs since the 70s. My mother seemed shocked and her lip quivered as if she didn't know what else to say. She made no indication that my father's statements weren't true. She only said, he never should have told you any of that. I liked that I was good at this job, maneuvering these small red mounds, judging when to squeeze harder and when to ease up. I had no worries about scars, since no one would be able to see them, and I felt a kind of satisfaction when the sticky fluid appeared, like the purging of something, but I didn't know what. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Gina. Our next reader is Janet Clare, author of Time is the Longest Distance. Originally from New York, Janet lives in Los Angeles with her husband. She studied at UC Berkeley and UCLA, and she's had short fiction and essays published in literary journals online and anthologized. Her first novel, Time is the Longest Distance, was published in December 2018. Set in the harsh desert of the Australian outback, Time is the Longest Distance is a moral story of immorality in a place where night comes on like a door slamming shut. Gina?
Janet, it's okay.
Pardon me, Janet.
It's okay. Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much. So nice for everybody to be here. My story is about Lily, who is a 45-year-old New Yorker who finds out from her mother, Ida, that her real father is a former explorer in Australia. She travels to meet him, and eventually they journey across 2 deserts. She's a fish out of water. This is a bit of her first meeting with Cameron, her father. Cameron's house was low-lying with a swath of untamed gardens, great piles of dying roses, fallen petals, leafy vines, and musty shrubs. The front door was slightly ajar. I'd invited myself, but he knew to expect me, so I knocked and pushed it open. "I'm out here." His voice was strong. I found my way through to a sunlit porch filled with potted plants and aging wicker furniture. Cameron sat on a cushioned chair surrounded by books and newspapers, coffee cups and half-empty glasses. The air didn't move. He looked up from his paper. "You're Lily," he said without smiling. He didn't look as old as I'd expected. Plenty of gray hair, an oval face ending in a firm chin. I tried not to stare. "You're my father," I answered. Did he expect me to run up and throw my arms around him? "I didn't sleep last night," he said. "We should have put this off until tomorrow." Really? Well, I hadn't slept much either. Nevertheless, I'd been dressed and ready for hours, having changed my clothes 3 times. I had on a white skirt and t-shirt, bright lipstick. My hair, washed and blown dry, shined. I was here to meet my father. And he was tired? He'd had 45 years to rest. "I've traveled 14,000 miles, I said. Resigned, he waved me in. "Come closer." "What about please?" I didn't take orders well, but moved further into the porch, which was screened all the way around and had dusty bits of leaves, twigs, and small bugs clinging to the outside baseboard. "You could sit," he said. He adjusted his glasses, the wire frames tangling his hair, and squinted at me. His eyes were dark and deep-set like mine. He was clean-shaven and wore brown cotton pants with a freshly pressed white shirt. I wondered if he'd ironed it himself. I sat, trying to act casual, failing. "I brought us some lunch," I said, holding the bag aloft like evidence at a trial. Where I came from, food was the great leveler. He nodded. On the table beside him was a dog-eared copy of Crossing the Dead Heart and Bryson's In a Sunburned Country. In the corner, a bag of potting soil overflowed and the air smelled like things growing with the wet dirt aroma of mulch made of leaves and straw. There were lacy ferns in cracked pots and velvet African violets and other spidery-looking plants I'd never seen before. "You're tall," he said. "It's good to be tall." I didn't think so when I was a kid. He pursed his lips like he was about to say something, but didn't. Was he wondering how I had been then? "I didn't expect to ever see you," he said. "You never tried." He didn't say anything. The air grew hotter. At one end of the porch, an elderly gray and white cat sat cradled in an ancient swing hanging from the ceiling by a rusted chain. Frayed grass mats covered the floorboards. "How could you not want to know about me?" I asked. He snorted, a rough laugh as if it were a joke, and placed his hands on his knees, stretching his fingers, his knuckles like hard knocks. I softened, thinking of arthritis as he got up and took a few gliding steps, his worn loafers scratching the floor. He pulled at the wilted leaves of a plant, his back to me. "I guess I'd have told you everything," he said, turning with a shit-eating grin that gave me the creeps. Good teeth, I wondered if they were his. He sat back down. "Not everything," I said. "Almost nothing, really, just the bare minimum." Sunlight hit his face as he adjusted his chair. He was more weathered than old, and he didn't have the blue-veined, brown-spotted pallor of old men. Instead, the Australian sun had cast him permanent walnut, and I paled by comparison, like I'd just been born. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Janet. Our next reader is Martha Engber, author of Winter Light, which will be published on October 6th, 2020. She's also the author of The Wind Thief, a novel, and Growing Great Characters from the Ground Up, a thorough primer for writers of fiction and nonfiction. She's had a full-length play produced in Hollywood and over a dozen short stories, essays, and poems published in anthologies and literary magazines such as The Aurorian, Watchword, and the Berkeley Fiction Review. She currently lives in Northern California with her husband, bike, and surfboard. Winter Light is the story of 15-year-old Mary Donahue of suburban Chicago, a kid on the cusp of failure during the brutal blizzard winter of 1978 to 79, the end of a hard rock era sunk in the cynical aftermath of the Vietnam War. Martha?
Hello. The book opens when events in Mary's life force her to do what many of us don't, reach across socioeconomic lines for help, in this case by forming a friendship with middle-class Kathleen. Though the two girls are physically near one another at school and live in the same town, they move within social groups and belong to families so different from one another that Mary and Kathleen struggle to learn one another's language. In this scene, school has been let out early due to a heavy snowstorm on its way. Mary spies Kathleen up ahead, walking home. They've already had a few run-ins, but the good from the interactions now outweighs the bad. Mary seizes the opportunity to smooth over the last dust-up. Mary neared and stopped. So, she said, trying to catch her breath and sound uninterested at the same time. A tough gig. Now she suddenly didn't know what to say, maybe because she had no experience pursuing anyone. Why'd you ignore me this morning? I didn't ignore you, Kathleen said. The hell you didn't. You walked right by me without saying anything. Well, it wasn't like you said hi to me either, and you didn't answer my calls, which is really impolite. I know. You know, so why'd you do it? Mary shrugged. That's all, Kathleen said, and gave an exaggerated shrug to mimic Mary. Don't you ever have any homework? What? I never see you carrying any books. Mary kept her eyes on Kathleen, on the point. You afraid to be seen with me? No, Kathleen said, yet she dropped her eyes. No as in yes. How come? Kathleen looked up. I'm not, don't bullshit me, Kat. Stop calling me that. Mary leaned forward. So, Kat, are you afraid to be seen talking to me? Kathleen threw out a mittened hand. Oh, so now all of a sudden we're being honest. Yeah. Oh, well, so long as we're being honest. So are you? Yes, Kathleen said, her cheeks as blotched, red and white. Why? Because you're a burnout. She stared at Kathleen, the snow between them like white noise made of silence. They both knew the hierarchy, preps, jocks, geeks, burnouts, the social strata similar to the geological one Mr. Van Dyke talked about last year in Earth Science, how one layer presses down on the previous one, with new layers added all the time, with neither pause nor mercy. Eventually, the weight grew unbearable and squashed varying sediments together into inescapable rivers of grit. Mary and her crowd comprised the very bottom layer, the shittiest place to be stuck, the weight so heavy you can't escape. So by associating with a burnout, you are one, Mary said? Oh, right, and like you haven't gone out of your way to keep from introducing me to your friends because I'm too uncool. You met them already. I did not meet them. You did not introduce me. You just let them give me trouble. Jaw and cheek muscles of Kathleen's face jumped. You wouldn't really introduce me like a friend because you'd be afraid of what they'd say about you hanging out with someone you think is such a Girl Scout. Were you? That's not the point, she huffed, creating white clouds of breath. You'd be embarrassed because I don't smoke and I don't do drugs and I don't date hot guys and flunk my classes. Mary smiled a little. And why is it you don't? And why is it you do? Kathleen shouted before casting her blazing eyes to the ground. It's like you want to fail, Kathleen said, and live a deplorable life of misery when all you'd have to do is homework sometimes and stuff. She leaned closer to Kathleen. You have no goddamn idea what you're talking about. Well, maybe I don't, but at least I try. None of you try. Oh, so now I represent all the burnouts? Well, you do. You're like the queen of them or something. How the hell would you know? At least I call people back. Tough girl Kathleen with 1,000 emotions fighting for space on that tiny oval stage. A kid in white mittens who said things like a deplorable life of misery with a straight face. Something about her that could piss you off and at the same time make you face yourself. She smiled. It's not funny, Kathleen said. It's not. Then why are you laughing at? Mary didn't want to laugh, but she did anyway. I'm not laughing at you. You are. It's just that you're right. Kathleen pressed her lips tight, having apparently expected Mary's reasoning to go left, only to have it go right. I'm sorry, Mary said, still smiling, but feeling more sincere than she had in a long time. I should have called. I was just messed up. It was really nice of you to check in on me and to invite me to your party. I bet yours was more fun than the one I went to. Kathleen's eyes held the heat of a battle she'd won, but wished she hadn't had to fight. She must not know what to think. Mary didn't either. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. It was lovely.
Thank you, Martha. I'd like to remind our audience that you can begin to type some questions for the chat, for the Q&A session into our chat, and we will get to your questions after the reading. And thank you so much for the questions that we've gotten so far. Our final reader is Jayne Martin, the author of Tender Cuts. Jayne started her writing career in television, where her credits include the movies A Child Too Many, Cradle of Conspiracy, and Deceived by Trust for Lifetime, and Big Spender for Animal Planet. These days, she writes flash and microfiction. Her stories have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, Best Small Fictions, and Best Microfiction, and she's the winner of Vestal Review's 2016 Vera Award. Her latest book, Tender Cuts, is a collection of 38 illustrated stories under 300 words each. Jayne lives in Santa Barbara, California. With pathos and humor, the characters in Tender Cuts do their best to deal with the wounds life inflicts on all of us, efforts that will touch the reader's own wounded heart. Welcome, Jayne.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Toni Morrison said, "It's what you don't write that frequently gives what you do write its power." And that could not be more true with the writing of microfiction, which I describe as stories under 300 words. In writing microfiction, you need to think like a painter because imagery and sensory detail is what engages the reader's imagination. So I'm going to read 4 stories from the book, starting with the title story, Tender Cuts. Julie Sue's hair cascades in long ringlets past her tiny shoulders, falling near her tightly corseted waist. Her corset pinches her skin, but Mama says to keep smiling, so she does. The Little Miss Soybean pageant pays $150 to the winner, and Mama says they need the money. Next to the stage, the stench of livestock rises from a pen where the 4-H animals await their turn at auction. Flies swarm in the summer heat, and Julie Sue bats them away from her face. "Stop your fussing," Mama scolds. She will dance the can-can, just like she's been taught. She wanted to twirl a baton like Becky or sing a song like Bonnie Jean. She doesn't like raising her skirt up and showing her panties, but Mama says she has nice legs and she should use what the good Lord gave her. The auctioneer's voice rises and cheers explode from the nearby tent. Someone's prize heifer sells for $1,000. Her music starts and Mama pushes her onto the stage. She will kick as high as she can. The next story is called BFFs. We snuggle deep into your bed pillows, banish your husband from the room because this is our time. You take off your wig, hang it over the bed lamp, your head a roadmap of scars, bald from chemo. It is the first time you'll let me see it, and I tell you, you are still the prettiest girl in high school. Then, because you would expect no less from me, I ask if I can sign it. You laugh and call me a bitch. You fill the high-tech blue plastic inhaler with medicinal quality weed. No sticks or stems, no fumbling with zigzags rolling paper like when we were young and sucking back on sloppy doobies. We inhale the sweet smoke, hold it in our lungs, and journey backward to the time of skin-tight skirts and dances at the Y. First dates, first cars, first marriages. We laugh till we cry, and then we just cry. The next story is called Gone. The shirt was neatly pressed just the way he liked it. She'd hung it on the refrigerator door where he'd be sure to see it first thing as he entered through the garage. He'd wondered where her car was at that hour and why the house was so quiet. He'd call out for Buddy, his beloved schnauzer, who was usually leaping against the kitchen door barking to greet him. At first, he wouldn't understand, but the large bird mark on the shirt hem would draw him close, and the trace of red still visible underneath would bring his memory into sharp focus. She'd laid the hot iron against the lipstick stain again and again as she thought about the woman who had put it there. She knew her well. She'd been her at one time, before the years had made her too replaceable. The sea breeze washed over her, taking the past with it as she sped up the coast. She imagined her husband picking up Buddy's empty food dish from the floor, maybe going to fill it before he remembered just how alone he was now. Her cell phone rang. She looked down at the screen. From the back seat, Buddy barked as he tried over and over to catch the wind in his mouth. She smiled and tossed him the phone. It's for you. The final story is called A Lobster Walks into a Laundromat. None of the women could recall when the lobster first appeared, his large claws clacking against the floor as he folded his laundry along with the rest of them. He would arrive on Mondays, 9 a.m., sharp, dragging a small cart brimming over with mostly napkins and tablecloths and smelling of butter. While not much of a talker, every so often a sound like that of a bow across the strings of a violin would emit from him, and though the women weren't clear about its meaning, they were charmed nonetheless. On occasion, one of them would swear that he'd winked at her and blush at the flutter it aroused. It had been years since any of them had been noticed in that way, and they had grown complacent about cosmetics, drab about dress, haggard about hairdos. But on Mondays, lipsticks with names like Crimson Crush, Potent Peach, and Orange You Hot would shine from newly painted lips, and the scent of Aquanet would hang in the air. Between wash and rinse cycles, the women would vie for the lobster's attention with tips on stain removers and fabric softeners, and the lobster would listen, attentive, as if they were spouting sonnets or Shakespeare, and each woman would feel special and seen. And they would return to their homes and husbands, lusty with demands the husbands would not understand, but would nevertheless acquiesce to until about Thursday, when the monotony of their days would cause the women to forget themselves once again. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Jayne. And a big thank you to all of our authors for sharing such poignant scenes. And I would like them to invite them all to rejoin us now. And while people have been reading, we've been getting some wonderful questions from the audience. And so I will dive right in and ask some of them, and look forward to talking with all of you. This is a question for Carolyn from Elizabeth in Georgetown. Hello, Elizabeth. Your protagonist, Somerset, and her mother have a prominent story arc. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. It's funny. I started out by focusing on Somerset and Jake, the love interest, and Somerset and Serena, her best friend. But sometimes a piece of writing will take you where it wants to go rather than where you originally intended for it to go. And in the end, the heart of the book is, I think, about Meredith and her journey with her daughter, Somerset and Meredith, the mother-daughter pair, as Somerset transitions to a new maturity in the book that kind of encompasses a new understanding of who her mother is. And by, it's the story arc from the beginning of the book, their relationship is one thing. By the end of the book, it's very, very different. So yeah, I would say maybe that's the most prominent story arc. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. This is a question for Janet. Did you have to do a lot of research to set your book in the Australian outback?
I did. I read everything I could. I did everything except go there. I never did travel to Australia. Yeah, love the research, but having traveled to some other remote places in the world, it worked for me. I was able to do it, and I've always wanted to be in Australia, so great fascination with it.
Do you think you'll go at some point after doing all this research and setting up?
Yes, if we're ever released in our lives again. Yes, of course, for sure.
Wonderful. Well, we will hope for that for you, for all of us.
For all of us.
This is a question for Gina. What inspired you to write The Angle of Flickering Light?
I never actually, when I started this, it was back in like 2007 working on my MFA. So it was sort of unintentional that it became a book. It started as all individual essays. And then what ended up happening is I kept realizing there were a lot of recurring themes, characters, and events throughout. And, when I was in grad school, people were saying, well, I think this is a book. So, so that's how it happened. It was sort of a long road.
Well, I was wondering about that, if you had sort of written it in chapters or as shorter essays, but we also have a question from Judith, which is, now that your memoir is written, how does your family feel about your memoir?
My mom's super supportive. I think it just depends on who in your family.
Right.
Yeah, so not everybody in the family knows about it, but the people that are in my life, in my family, know about it. So, you worry about those things, but in the end, I think as long as you're telling your story and you're not trying to write anything in a malicious way and you're honoring your own emotional truth, then you have kind of a right to tell your story. But luckily I have, you know, a supportive mom and sisters and stepfather and friends. So yeah, it's been okay.
That's wonderful to hear, because it does take a lot of bravery to write a personal story. It makes something personal so public.
Yes.
Not just to people that we maybe don't know who are buying our book in a bookstore, but public to the people that we've lived with our whole lives and who might see us differently now. So I applaud you for your courage in sort of sticking with it all the way since your MFA.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Judith.
This is a question for Martha. Why do you think coming of age stories are so compelling?
I think everybody has the sensation that they are looking at something, but everything is very murky. But you can tell that within that murkiness, there's some real dangers. I remember feeling that in high school. You would meet people and they would hint at things, and they were, you know, and then you, in combination with not only in schoolwork, you're learning new things about new places, but you're also listening closer. And what a crazy time when you finally do have these moments of breakout and you realize exactly how the world is. And that's what coming of age is. It's that you're in this murky place, and then you know, a bright world opens. And sometimes in that bright world, it's just really harsh. You know, the realities are really harsh. You don't know hunger, and then you meet somebody who does, and you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, you didn't even know that could happen. And that's why I think it's just so powerful. It's like you learn how the world really is, and then there's no going back. Once you learn how the world is, there's no going back.
That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that perspective, because I think sometimes as adults, we're not quite sure we're going to enjoy reading a story about when people are in high school, that can still feel relatable. And I think I was reading specialist in middle and high school for many years, and I read all of the books that they needed to read, and it was very compelling. So I really appreciated that aspect of Winterlight. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jayne, we have a question for you from a reader. Your collection really is made up of microfiction, in that your stories are, many of them, mainly all of them, fewer than 300 words, some as short as 50. When you write short pieces like this, what do you think is the most important thing to consider?
Emotional resonance, without question. You have to leave your reader having had an emotional experience. And that's why the use of sensory details is so important, because our brains are wired to respond to sensory imagery, to sensory details. So when I'm writing a piece and I get to a sentence where I see, oh, wait a minute, I'm telling something here. I go back and I try to find an image that represents it. So really, for micro especially, the old adage, show don't tell, I think is very, very important. Because there's no room to tell. There's no room for exposition. There's no room for backstory. And when a person reads one of these stories, it's like cooking a reduction sauce. You get down to the very essence of it, but you should know what that whole story is. Mm-hmm. It should just give you a glimpse, but you should go, oh yeah, I know what that story is. I know the bigger picture. So that's what drives me.
One of the things I think is so surprising about microfiction too is that even though it's very short, it takes quite a while to write. I mean, just because it's shorter doesn't make it easier. And so I really find that very exciting about Tender Cuts, is that all the pieces are shorter.
It's kind of like the art or the craft of bonsai, really. You know, you're just shaping that world, but it has to all fit. And sometimes you can get lucky and you get an image and the image just takes off. And, you know, other times you just spend a lot of time revising till you just find that emotional truth and the image that represents it best.
Thank you. We have one last question. This is for Carolyn. The style of In the Fullness of Time is very cinematic. Was that a deliberate choice on your part?
Thank you for the question. The book actually started out as a screenplay. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the imagery of the original screenplay ended up on the page. So it makes sense to me that, yeah, that would happen. And yeah, I do think it would make a great movie. If anyone out there in Hollywood is listening, you know, take a look.
We definitely have listeners from the West Coast right now, and I want to thank everybody for participating. We do have our winner of each of these books and several Vine Leaves notebooks, and our winner is Bonnie in Georgetown.
Yay!
Yay!
I will be sure to get your information to Martha so that you can receive your prize. And it's time to draw to a close. It's been such a wonderful, stimulating evening. I want to thank everyone for asking such wonderful questions, all of our audience members for being here and listening to our 5 wonderful authors. And on behalf of myself, the authors, and Vine Leaves Press, I just want to say how grateful we are that you joined us this evening. And we appreciate you and your love of reading. And so please be well and keep on reading. And we are going to show a slide that says where you can get the books. You can always go to Vine Leaves Press, IndieBound, bookshop.org, any other online retailer, and hopefully your independent bookstores. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So much
Thank
for
you.
coming and spending your time.
Stay safe, stay well.
Right.